Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and on this Monday afternoon, I'm joined by James McKenzie. James, who valiantly held the fort while I was away for a couple of weeks, James, and you done brilliantly. You must be missing it.
Yeah, it was every single day having to try and come up with as many new topics as possible. In a transfer window where Celtic weren't really spending a lot of money or getting linked by a lot of players, it was quite difficult at first. And of course, the day after I stopped hosting the show, I think a new kit got announced. Jota left. Brendan Rodgers done a press conference. Of course,
and it all fell in my lap
as soon as I've left.
It all fell in my lap. You mentioned a Brendan Rodgers press conference. He's obviously been speaking to, I think it was Mark Benstead up at Sky today, up at the park. Didn't see him, got to say. I was up at Celtic Park this morning. We were recording a wander round Paradise. Why do we do that? Well, it's a new show on the channel, James. It's a different look to the Acsom Bulletin. That isn't going to change. We're going to keep the Acsom Bulletin as it is. I'll tell you what, when we do the live events, the amount of people that come up and say that you're in my living room every afternoon, it's interesting, and it is really greatly appreciated, because I think that a lot of people say that, during the pandemic, it was something that gave them a bit of structure around their afternoon. And my response always is it gave us a bit of structure as well, James, because I had to go live at 12:30 every day, and I knew that I had to be prepared for that. So we go up to Parkhead, and we go up to Celtic Park or Paradise, whatever you like to call it. And we record a wee roundup of the week's events every Monday morning. Goes out at 6 o'clock on the channel. And it's a fully produced video, so it looks a bit different. Gives you a wee look at the sunshine, and this morning, the rainfall around Paradise. It looks different every single week, James. And it's something that eventually, if an Acsom contributor is available, or if somebody else is available and they want to put a message across, we can get you involved. I'm not sure if it's a wee bit early in the morning to be at Celtic Park for 8 o'clock for you, though, James.
Yeah, if the 900 bus still runs for Edinburgh to Glasgow about that time, I could maybe make it through.
I'll be at your door at 7 in the morning, rattling on the door. It's always great to go up to the dear old Paradise. And that, of course, was the name of a book written by David Potter. David Potter very sadly passed away over the weekend. We learned this yesterday. And, he's a guy who, I've got to say, over the last dozen years, over the last 13 years, I've been in regular touch with David. And he helped me with my books. He was always on the end of a phone. You would see him at some of the local events, like the Johnny Thompson events, etc., Celtic Graves Society events. He was an incredible historian, a brilliant author. And to date, as far as I'm aware, no one has written as many books as David Potter has about our football club. The only person coming close, I reckon, would be Roger Bailey, because he had a great series of playing for Celtic books. But David dedicated so much of his life to not just following Celtic, but researching the history, documenting the history. And he's a great, great loss. So I've got to say thoughts and prayers genuinely with every member of his family and all his pals as well, of which there are many, James. He was a bit of an inspiration for a young guy, I say young, or a new author, let's just say, when I entered the field of writing Celtic books. And he was always on the other end of the phone, which is something of a dream for a guy like you as well, breaking into journalism. It's great to have people like that, isn't it?
Yes, when I was looking at Twitter, I didn't know of David before he passed, but you get this a lot with people. You don't realise sort of how loved some people are until they passed, and you see the tweets streaming in, you see the tributes sort of flowing in, and you realise how much these people actually mean to others. David Potter, as you were mentioning, a lot of Celtic books, and a guy who loved the club, just like everybody else did, a bit more than some other fans might have. But it's the fact that he was going to help a lot of people get into that field as well. The fact that he helped yourself and was there to speak to yourself whenever you needed sort of a bit of guidance, it's great. And rest in peace to David.
Absolutely. I always remember it came through. We'd done a podcast in the early days of A Celtic State of Mind. It was after the Invincible treble had been wrapped up. It was probably that week, to be honest, or certainly within a fortnight of that game. And we just sat in the kitchen when it was a kitchen table podcast with a pot of tea, a big plate of Kirriemuir gingerbread, and we got stuck in talking about Celtic, and David was fantastic. So yes, well remembered. And if you want to listen back to that, actually, it's on the YouTube channel. Go and have a listen to it. I think about an hour. David waxing lyrical about his beloved Celtic. He loved the club and he'll be sadly missed. As a Celtic follower says on YouTube, afternoon all sad to hear of David Potter's passing. A true Celtic biographer, rest in peace. Also on the back of that as well, I seen Rodgers' interview on Sky Sports and was pleasantly pleased. He seems hungry for improvement and success. And that's where the tagline comes today, James. We're going to be talking about the Wolves game, how prepared we are, tomorrow night's game, everything else that's happening. But Rodgers gave a bit of info around transfers. And I think that we've got a different beast this time round. I think that when he came to Celtic, he thought he was going to, rule the world his way. He was going to do it his way. And eventually when it got to the point, and by the way, having interfering parties within the recruitment of your football team must be very, very difficult. But once it got to that point where he was trying to push the envelope on signings, for example, the club were having this position, Rodgers was over here. He wanted this position in terms of fees and, the type of player we were signing. What I took from today's interview was that they're on the same page. He is focused, he is hungry, but he seems very realistic when it comes to the transfer business we're going to be doing.
Yeah, if you're going to compare sort of Rodgers' second time around to the first, you could say maybe when the first time he came in, they had a bit more ego than he does now. I know there was a lot of calling Rodgers an egomaniac when he'd left and everybody was hurt. But he'd come from being second place in the Premier League with Liverpool, this close to winning the Premier League with all of this sort of staff behind him. Everybody telling him he's amazing because of what he'd done with that Liverpool team, and he'd come into Celtic and thinking, right, I'm going to have complete control over all of this. I've just come for one of the top teams in the Premier League. I've got to come in here. I sign this player, whatever I say goes. And we can't deny the team was successful, of course. Invincible season the first time around, but as you mentioned, the interfering parties, there was still some problems there, which seem to have gone now. It seems like Mark Lawwell is the man that's controlling everything. Mark Lawwell seems to be having a big say because I don't think Brendan Rodgers, without Mark Lawwell's help, would have pinpointed Yang Hyun-jun as a player he would have wanted to bring in. Celtic's changed a lot. We spoke about that when Rodgers first got appointed. We spoke about how much Celtic's changed. And even just the scouting network at the club in general, we're going into these untapped markets. We're playing a different style of football. We're getting players who have a point to prove. And we've now got Brendan Rodgers back, who you could say has a point to prove as well. He was basically laughed out of England, and then the jobs he's been linked within England. I think he was linked with the Spurs job. They're like, no, we don't want Brendan Rodgers. We don't want Brendan Rodgers. So it seems like if he's looking to build up his reputation again, a bit like when he came to the club the first time, it's going to be a case of building a reputation and winning trophies with Celtic and going towards the transfer window on the right plan. It should all help him on his way to that.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, James, how quickly the manager's stock can rise and fall. Because, I think Alan Morrison's certainly written quite a bit about the 3 seasons, the first full seasons that Brendan was at the club when he was at Leicester, that is. Because obviously he had that section of a season, then he had 3 very good seasons at Leicester, and then the final one where he's left before the end of the campaign, which they got relegated in. So, it's interesting how people just remember the end rather than the 3 years before that, where he's done extremely well. So I think that if Brendan Rodgers comes and does exactly what he's promised in the very first press conference and stays for 3 years and delivers the trophies and delivers progress, and hopefully part of that progress is in Europe, then, like you say there, the stock has been built back up and he may well look to go elsewhere. Maybe that next step isn't the EPL. Who knows what it is? Maybe he has ambitions to go into international football or coach in Spain, because he speaks the lingo, apparently. Doesn't mention it much, though. Jungle Lion, I saw some of your pictures on your socials. It looks as though you had a great time. We will be talking about Celtic in Dublin, the game, who impressed, and everything else around about that trip as well. Paddy Lavery, afternoon to you. I was speaking to someone on Friday night who knew you from your neck of the woods as well, Paddy. And Edward Moore, how many players do you think Brendan will sign before it shuts? Right, let's start with this one then from Edward, James. He was talking about, not going out and signing 15 or 20 million pound players, Brendan, and that's a conversation we've had over the last few weeks. I use the example of that pre-season when we're going for the 10, Neil Lennon's in charge, and we kind of changed tact a bit, and we go out and we sign. Obviously, Shane Duffy came in on loan, and I think he comes in at that point, and I've not done it yet. I keep promising to do it. Go back to not only the tweets that Celtic sent out, but the shows that we did at that time. And we were all pretty buzzing about the fact that Shane Duffy was coming to Celtic. Albion Ayeti, delighted we were signing a striker from the EPL.
It didn't help that Shane Duffy's first 2 games for the club, I think he scored 2 games in a row, which had us all excited. Everybody was thinking he was going to do well, and I think it might have been. I think it was the game just before we played Rangers at Celtic Park. I think Shane Duffy had a bit of a dodge on him. I think it might have been Kilmarnock away when we drew. The warning signs were sort of there, and then from there it was just even Albion Ayeti. He sort of hit the ground running in his first few months at Celtic. I think he scored an absolute corker against Dundee United, if I remember correctly.
1-0 game. Yeah,
I think it was just that was a last minute goal. I remember him scoring an absolute sort of thunderbolt of a goal when we played them at Celtic Park as well. But it's just from about that October month onwards, things just really started to go down fast. And sort of those players, the form went off an absolute cliff.
Oh, they definitely did. And, I think it's a cautionary tale. We could go out and announce today that we've signed 2 players, let's say for £5 million. It doesn't necessarily, tick the box that we need ticked. And the way that Brendan was talking today, I do feel that it was a far more realistic Brendan Rodgers talking about the fact that he's going to work with the strategy that's already in place at the club. He's name-checked Mark Lawwell, like you said before, the recruitment of those players, it's all happening in the background. He will say yes or no to that. And when you look back, he's probably got regrets, and probably those at the club have got regrets as to why that, ultimately fell to bits at the end in terms of the relationship between Brendan and the club. And, is there any apprehension in your mind, James, going into the game tomorrow, which we will come back to in more detail, about obviously a section of the support who weren't happy about Brendan coming back? Do you think that has been quickly forgotten?
It seems like you've sort of brought up that memory back into my mind. I completely forgot about the Green Brigade's initial reaction to it. I think I mentioned on the shows that followed that it's an appointment that was already created division. You don't want to cause more of that by bringing up a banner of we don't forget sort of banner at Celtic Park. You want to get the club on side. If you're looking to sort of push on in Europe, you're not going to do that with a split fan base with split opinions. It's the way to get the fans on side is by winning games. So I'm sure they play the first game of the season and we put 4 goals past them. I'm not too sure who it is we've got in the first game, but we'll put 4 goals past them. I'm sure play some good football. I'm sure that'll get the fans back on side. But you'd want to be avoiding that division. I don't think we'll see something like that. Even at James Forrest's testimonial, it's a guy who's sort of dedicated his entire career to the club. You don't want to sort of tarnish a celebration of his Celtic career by sort of letting your protest get in the way of it or whatever. I mentioned last week I thought James Forrest was past it, which the comments didn't really take too kindly for, but we can all acknowledge that James Forrest has had lots of great moments in his Celtic career, and he's been a dedicated servant to the club, and hopefully a good crowd can turn up for it.
I hope so, and we will talk about this, but I'm going to go back to the point. How many do you think we'll bring in? Or a big comment that I've seen on the socials and also on the comment section on the YouTube channel, James, how many of the 5 players that have already come in are going to be starters? Now, by the way, it's all down to the player. It's all down to the player, and I've said this time and time again. I don't think the first 4 players were brought in to start straight off the bat for Celtic. I think that they've brought in to bolster the squad. You look at the profile of each of the players, obviously from different parts of the world, but the profile in terms of their age, their kind of value, their sell-on value, the potential of that. And you look at the 4 of them and you think, well, I don't think any of them any of the right wingers are going to start over Abada. I don't think that Home or Kwon are going to, displace Matt O'Reilly, Callum McGregor or Riho Hatate. I'm pretty confident that they're not straight off the bat. But as the season develops, with form, suspension, all that kind of thing, then they start coming in. Do they take their chance? Yes. Then they're, deserving of a place the following week. That's the way that's going to work. I think it's different when it comes to Norowski, though. I think that he has been brought to the club in the way that I want us to bring in a left back and a goalie. They're no guaranteed jersey. but you want to bring them in to really push for that first team jersey. You know, the injuries to Kobayashi and Cameron Carter-Vickers and also Starfelt will probably mean that if fit, he'll play tomorrow night. But that's the way I look at the signing so far. You've got the 4 guys where the deals are already in the works, James, and they're going to have to obviously work and push in to the team. But by the way, that was the same situation Rio Hatate was in when he came to the club. It was the same situation that Matt O'Reilly was in. And when they got the opportunity, they proved that they were obviously worthy of the jersey. So, it's a difficult one to know until Brendan Rodgers starts selecting his starting 11. But tomorrow night's game, James, for me, is a different type of game than it would have been had Ange stayed at the club. There was no change in manager and it was a testimonial. And I think it's the same with the 2 Japanese games over there. I think that they were very much a brand exercise and, you know, they just ticked along nicely. They became an assessment process for Brendan Rodgers. And I think the Wolves game at the weekend and tomorrow night's game is all about, you know, tinkering with the team now to try and figure out what's your best 11 for Saturday's game against Ross County. So there's a whole different, for me, there's a whole different look to the last couple of games, the last 4 games.
Yeah, if Ange was still at the club, it would have just been just another game. The focus would have been on, as I mentioned earlier, celebrating the career of James Forrest. But instead, it's a game that provides room for Brendan Rodgers to experiment as much as he can, sort of try out some tactical tweaks or have some sort of face-to-face conversations with the players in training to sort of really try and work on developing their game. The team's only going to improve by playing games of football and playing against Premier League opposition, as well as the J League, which we know now is of a high quality, then especially when the teams are about 3/4 of the way through their season. These are games that are going to be testing the club going into this season. It provides the perfect platform for Brendan Rodgers to experiment as well. But we're not going to know how much of a role these new guys are going to play until the season really starts. I think Navrocki is probably the only one who I could see potentially displacing our starter. I thought I'd mentioned the blog quite a lot that I thought the gap between Carter Vickers to Starfelt and then the gap from Starfelt to the rest of the centre backs at the club, it was too large. You can't be having that much of a drop off going from your 2 starters to the rest of the players. I think Navrocki is going to help bridge that. And we'll need to see the first 2 games this season how confident we could be on him potentially slipping in for a Champions League game.
Yeah.
The fact he's good with both his feet really encourages me, because it was really awkward seeing Starfelt always having to turn onto his right foot, and you're not going to get that time in Europe. So I think if anyone's going to make an impact, I think it could be Navrocki. I still think the club could use another winger of a potential starting quality, but if Celtic aren't going to sign like a fully fledged Jota replacement, and it's going to be on Aliyah Labada to step up. He's going to be the man who's going to be the focal point of Celtic's attacks from the wings now. So he'll need to step up, definitely.
Yeah, I agree with that. Ian McGinley, hail, brothers and sisters, and hail to you as well. Good afternoon, comrades, says Patrick Harold. It's great to see the regular names appearing on here, and also the new names as well who are getting involved in a Celtic state of mind. Now we've got Jerry Doorstop. Do you think any of the new signings will walk straight into the start 11? I tend to agree with Jane. I don't think anyone's going to walk into this team, this treble winning team. But of the 5, I think the centre half is the one that we really do need to look at and say, well, you're coming in straight off the bat, a wee bit like Starfelt when he came in. You know, he signed, he hadn't really been introduced to his teammates, and then he's thrown into a game at Tynecastle. John Sweeney, we need a goalkeeper and an upgrade on Taylor for the up-and-coming away games against Aberdeen and Rangers. Right, we'll come back to that point, John, because I don't disagree with that. I do think we need a goalkeeper and a left back. I agree with James. I think we need a left winger. I think if you've still got time and someone presents themselves or a name is presented very much in the same mould as when O'Reilly was presented to us, it wasn't someone we were looking for, then I would also like to bring in another striker. And I think looking at the squad, personally, James, I'm happy with the midfield. I know people disagree with that. People are saying to me they need physicality in midfield. I think our strongest midfield is McGregor, Hatate and O'Reilly. And then you're looking at all the backup. We've already brought in 2 defensive midfield players in the summer. We've also got guys like David Turnbull in the building. So I don't think midfield is a concern. But for me, Bring in a goalie, and if you're going to do it, get him to challenge Joe Hart. Bring in a left back. Same applies for Greg Taylor. And left wing, I just think we're too short on the left wing. Like if Maeda's not fit and he doesn't play, I think the drop down is similar to the centre half position, James.
Yeah, I think even when you look at the quality of player as well, if you think how good is Diaz Maeda compared to how good Jota is, Jota was levels ahead of Diaz Maeda. We all love Diaz Maeda. We all think he's a phenomenal player. The work he does in the park can't be understated, but he's not as good as Jota. And Jota's quality is going to be hard to replace. It's not as simple as I'm making it seem. It's going to take a long process for Celtic. But if we can pay the money to try and replace him, I'd love us to do that. I think the commenter mentioned about getting a new left back. I don't think that's needed. I think Greg Taylor proved his place in the team to the point where there was legitimate calls for him to be player of the season. Those calls weren't really ridiculous. The only concern I would have about Greg Taylor is towards the tail end of last season, I don't know if it was just fatigue, but injuries were starting to creep up a bit. There was a couple of occasions where it was only for like 1 or 2 games. I don't remember him having a real long-term injury, but those sort of things are going to try to break up the chemistry of the team if there's going to be a player who's in and out every 2 seconds. But I don't think we need a new midfielder. I mentioned at the start of the window before Moy or anything had retired, I thought the midfield was one of the strongest parts of the team. If you were to look at Celtic and you were to name the strongest 11 you can out of the current crop of players available, the strongest position in the park's the midfield. McGregor, Patty, O'Reilly, those 3 starters are definitely the strongest players in the park. And you don't want to sign more midfielders because none of them are going to displace them. Unless Kwon comes into the team and scores a hat-trick or whatever, I don't think he's going to displace Callum McGregor. It's going to take a real sort of finding yourself, really got to step up if you are going to displace them. I think you're more likely to see them get a place in the team if a Hatate or O'Reilly is to leave in January. I think that's what it would take for some of them to get a chance. But I'm really excited to see what Home can do. I mentioned it last Tuesday that I'm the fickle type who falls for the type of tags of golden boy or things like that. Those things get me excited. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Home can do. That's a couple of these like scouting accounts I follow on Twitter have been really big on him as well. So I want to see him get a bit more game time. I'm a bit excited about that signing.
Another point I'd make about the midfield there is try to displace those 3 players you'd mentioned, and I agree that's your strongest 3. You're looking at displacing a captain of the club, James, but 2 players that I think are going to go up more levels this season. I think we're going. I always spoke last season about versions 2 of O'Reilly and Hatate because they had developed. You could see it, and I know that O'Reilly didn't get enough goals last year. I know that. But, you know, in terms of his assists and his overall play, I think there was an improvement on O'Reilly from the first season and undoubtedly an improvement in Hatate. And if he had not got injured during the season, I reckon he'd have been player of the year. He'd been scooping up all those awards. So not only are you trying to displace a settled 3 in the midfield, you're also, you know, trying to displace guys who I think are on the up and up, plus the captain. So it's going to be very difficult. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more of Home. I've liked what I've seen so far. Kind of floated under the radar a wee bit in regards to the games that he's played already. I'll be talking about Kwon and Yang. I want to speak about Welsh and Scales and also the aforementioned Abada. So Wolves, I thought it was a very good test. What did we take away from it? What did Brendan Rodgers learn from the game?
I think when you're playing against a team like Wolves, I think they've got some financial troubles right now, but they are still a Premier League team. As much as they have some financial troubles, they still did spend £40 million on a player this summer. It's a team that is going to be a challenge for Celtic, and for the most part, we looked up for it. I thought we looked like the better team. I thought Kyogo looked sharp, as he has been all the pre-season. I thought Liel Abada looked really sharp. I think the viewers are going to get really tired of me ranting and raving about Abada pretty soon, because I think he's on for a big season. But on Stephen Welsh, I thought Stephen Welsh was, from what I saw, I missed the final 15 minutes, but from what I saw, I thought Stephen Welsh looked pretty solid. I think the fans, a lot of them were a bit worried when you're looking at the team going into the game, but I think if you can slip Cameron Carter-Vickers back in the team, which, if the reports are true, Cameron Carter-Vickers is going to be back in the team maybe even tomorrow. He could be fit for tomorrow. So when you see Cameron Carter-Vickers back in the team sheet, back in that defence, I think a lot of the panic will be settled amongst fans pretty quickly. But I thought it was the right test for the team. And if what I'm hearing about the penalty is true, it seems like it was a pretty dodgy decision. I missed it. I'm sure the comments can fill me in on their verdict of the decision. But on Stephen Welsh, I thought he was all right from what I've seen. I think Scales has been getting a lot of the plaudits. I think you'd think he'd played like Maldini for the first 20 minutes, the way some of the people are raving about the performance. But we can't forget that he was pretty poor, it was pretty mediocre at Aberdeen last season. A friendly against Wolves isn't really going to sway me on him, but on Stephen Welsh, I think I've always thought he's a decent option. I rate him higher than Yuki Kobayashi if I'm looking at the pecking order there. But he needs to develop his game. There is weaknesses there. You're lying to yourself if you don't see the weaknesses, and he's not going to develop them by sitting on the Celtic bench. The only way you're going to get rid of those weaknesses is by moving on. And it might be the best thing for him, although I would like him to get a bit more game time.
I think there's going to be players that will surprise us simply because Brendan Rodgers is in the building, James. You know, I wrote a list and I keep banging on about it, about players that I expect to leave this summer. Stephen Welsh is on it, not because I don't rate him, but because I don't think he's in the top, I would say, 4 picks at the moment. But I agree with you, and I mean centre-half wise, I agree with you at this present time, looking at his performances, I would play him before I would play Kobayashi. And I don't want to be too harsh on, you know, culling all these players when very quickly, almost overnight, you end up with 5 injuries and you've only got 2 centre-halves unless you bring in Boss and Lawal or play Awata there, because that would have been the other options that we had if Scales and Welsh weren't playing or if they had departed the club. The thing with Scales for me is when he came to Celtic, I looked upon him very much as a player that you're bringing in because he's done very, very well in Ireland and he's got bags of potential. And then he comes into the team under Ange and he had a few good games. There's no denying it. He had a few good games for Celtic. I think up at Tannadice. Yep, he definitely did. Aye, I mean, that was a cracking goal at Tannadice. And, you know, I thought played well the night that's famous for Tony Ralston scoring the 97th minute winner. He played well that night. But there were other performances where he was left, I think he was left really lacking in some areas of his game. And the best thing that could have happened was get him out to a fellow SPFL club so that he can come back and he's at the same level. So I think those games will have benefited him. And he was a challenging team last season in terms of the ups and downs of Aberdeen Football Club, James. I think he's come through that pretty well. And there's going to be a big decision to be made around his future. Do you, if you get a bid, let's say if you get a bid of £500,000 in this window, do you take it for Liam Scales, James?
I'm not too sure. Would that be a profit on what we paid for Scales in the first place?
Roughly the same fee that we paid. Yeah,
if you could break even, you would probably take that. I think the Bodo Glimt game, as much as the entire team were pretty poor over the 2 legs against Bodo Glimt, Scales had a standout shocker in the away leg. Yeah. And if you look at all the ups and downs of Aberdeen's season, I think a lot of the downs happened with Scales at centre-back. I think I was in attendance when Aberdeen got absolutely hammered 6-0 by Hibs at Easter Road, and I saw Liam Scales get sent off that day. They didn't look very good at all. But I think that Aberdeen fans seem to really want Scales to join the club. They seem to be pushing it. And with the signing of Navrocki, I don't think there's really a place for Scales at the club. I'm always conscious about overhauling certain positions. We can only send out 2 centre-backs at the end of the day. So I think you just be keeping them around for the sake of keeping them around. I think it's probably best for him to move on.
Yeah, well, the other thing is with Welsh. There's been loads of interest over 2 seasons, over 4 transfer windows for Welsh, and the time never seemed right because initially we didn't know how long Julian was going to be out. That whole period that he was injured, and it seemed to go on forever. So we're holding on to Welsh because we didn't really know what was happening with Julian. We brought in, loan deals that might have turned into permanent deals, but for some reason Ange didn't fancy it with regards to Maurice Jens. And the result of that is Welsh is still here, having only played 6 games last season, but he can't go through another campaign like that. So I really would be delighted if Brendan Rodgers takes him under his wing, James, and develops him the way we know he can when it comes to young players. David Boyle, having been at the game, I felt Welsh was fantastic, really commanding, which was a surprise. Taylor is a worry, and Iwata is solid. Well, what I like about Iwata is the fact that we now have 3 options at right back, because, that was one of the situations where, you get 2 injuries like we have witnessed here, and you're thinking, who plays right back? And, I know Welsh can play out there. And then Iwata steps up, and he's been pretty impressive, I've got to say. So he, I think, is going to benefit from having that adaptability. He can play right back. We've seen him at centre-half. He played the Scottish Cup final at centre-half. His best position's a defensive mid, no doubt about it, James. But to have that adaptability equals more games in a team like this.
Yeah, I think Brendan Rodgers will appreciate that as well, having a sort of a player that can do all, a Swiss Army knife that can sort of step in and do it anywhere. They can play defensive midfield, they can play centre back, he can play right back. I don't think it's as clear cut what his best position is, because we've seen some of his best in each of the 3 positions you mentioned. He showed the qualities to potentially be able to do something in any of those positions. I don't think he'd be displacing Alistair Johnson at right back anytime soon, or forcing Cameron Carter-Vickers out of the team. But to have a player that can step in and do a solid job in 3 different positions, I think Brendan Rodgers is really going to appreciate that. I think Iwata might be one of the few players who's started every single game in pre-season. I think he's been in the 11, or at least made an appearance in each of those games. So if you're sort of over-analysing pre-season, which we warn not to do, but it's hard not to get a bit sucked into it when you're not getting that much Celtic content. It seems like Brendan Rodgers is a big fan of him. I know Liam Carrigan will be absolutely buzzing with that assessment from myself, but we could be in for a big season from him.
Yeah, and it's. I remember when we signed Hatate. If you go back to that as well, people were looking at his previous games and saying Hatate can play left back. Thankfully, we've not had to play him there that often. When we were talking about the Wolves game, one of the first things you mentioned was Kyogo, and I think it's easy to talk about the central defensive partnership, the performances of the likes of Taylor or Iwata, etc. And you forget, because Kyogo, you expect a level of performance from him. But, it would be remiss of us just to, gloss over that and move on. Kyogo was phenomenal. The goal that he scored was tremendous. The wee dink over the goalie that came off the bar would have been a phenomenal goal as well. He looks really, really sharp, James. And the one thing that Kyogo can, and I think is capable of adding to his Celtic game, is performances at the very, very top level in Europe. And that's what I'm going to be interested in watching this season.
Yeah, Kyogo's is so sharp that he can make even sort of the most composed and settled defence look a bit rusty. I think that's a Premier League defence that Kyogo's just made to look like absolute mugs. Yeah, he's a great player. I think we need to see him in a Champions League campaign. A lot of the criticism he gets is like he's not really done it in Europe. I hark back to the Europa League campaign, the first game of the season. I say he can do it in Europe. I think we saw it then. It was just a campaign that was interrupted by injuries last season, and that didn't really allow him to play at his best. I think he got injured the first derby of the season against Rangers. And I think he only started about 2 games in the campaign. I remember Giakoumakis leading the line for most of it. So it'll be interesting to see how Kyogo will do with a full campaign. He had some of his chances. He had some chances in the campaign last year, but I want to see a bit more of him this year.
Yeah, without a doubt. And the other player that really impressed, and you've already mentioned him, was Abada. I'm on your bus. I'm on your Abada bus here. And I've been saying, the timing of the Jota move, I don't think was great for us as fans. It developed, it all kind of just played out in front of us. Fabrizio Romano has even spoken about us not really expecting this to happen this summer, but it has happened. But I think it's opened a door for Abada. Abada has shown us what he can do over a period of 2 years. And the one thing I would like to see him add into his game is a level of consistency. Because, there was often times when he would come on, James, and really make an impact as a sub. And you'd be like, he deserves a jersey for the next game. And then he was almost anonymous in the next game if he started. And I just think we need that consistency, because he's undoubtedly got it. He's got the tricks, he's got the pace, he's got the finishing and the assists. Because I think what was happening over in Japan is he was the outball every time, playing Abada. He's brilliant running onto it. He's fantastic at that. And he showed that again, I think, against Wolves. But I pointed this out after the game. There was also a moment where it was just basically Abada showing that he's confident and he's up for it and he's focused and he's direct. And he was out in the left, and the way they brought the ball down was superb. It really was sublime. But then, rather than just get rid of the ball, he's then nutmegged the right back. So he really fancied it, James, And I think what we're going to get from Abada this season, if we're able to keep him, and I hope we can, is a player who, under the tutelage of Brendan Rodgers, can take his game to another level.
Yeah, he's got something that you can't really teach. You can't coach it into someone, and that is the knack for popping up in a big game. In a big moment where the team needs you the most, he could pop up with a goal, and you can't coach that. That's just a mentality thing. The players that raise their games to the big occasion, the derby matches, when the team's back's against the wall, we need a late goal. He can be the player that could pop up with that. I think you mentioned he was a bit inconsistent. I could perhaps give you that one. I might slightly disagree. I thought he was playing that often when he's appearing off the bench for about 20 minutes. You're not really going to get the full chance to see much of him, but he might have fell victim to the fact that how good Jota was as well, and the fact that he might have gone a bit underappreciated just because of the fact that Jota was so good. But I'm sure we can all agree it's going to be a big season for him. A lot of the attacking onus is going to be on him to pop up with the goals, because you've lost Jota, you've lost what he adds to the team in attack. But we know the connection Abada and Kyogo have. We saw it in the early days of Ange Ball. They've got the song together. That's how tight the connection is between the two of them. I think Abada drives Kyogo to training, actually, if I remember correctly. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do this season.
Aye, without a doubt. I mean, you can't underestimate, I don't think, the importance to Abada of near beat on, particularly, obviously, when he's arrived as a young kid and in that first season. And he's spoken about it. Season 2, I'm not putting it down to, Beaton leaving the building. Absolutely not. But, there was a bit of a drop-off, I think, in his performance. There certainly was in his minutes. He played about 1,000 minutes less, which is a lot of game time for any player in season 2 compared to season 1. So he was appearing in a lot of the games, James, but he wasn't playing as much football as he had done in season 1 under Ange Postecoglou. I really am excited to see how he's going to develop. I want to talk a wee bit about the experience of going over to Japan and then taking Celtic over to Dublin, because, I've been mentioning this time and time again. I don't think we do it often enough. I'm talking about Ireland, taking Celtic over to Ireland. We don't do it often enough.
It's right in the doorstep as well.
I know.
There's not really excuses for the club not to. When was the last time we went over? Was it the Amido Balde friendly against Liverpool? Was that the last time?
Is that what we're calling it? The Amido Balde? Because I know exactly what you're talking about when you call it that.
Did we not play Barcelona in our friendly over in Ireland? I remember,
we did.
I remember there's a photo of Scott Brown and Messi with the bleach blonde hair.
That's right. Yeah, we did.
O'Connor scored an absolute screamer against Leicester in that wee tour as well. You remember having the centre back, you and O'Connor?
I do, but talking about young players coming through, and I was going to say that when you were talking about the Golden Boys and the different lists you get and all that, on an annual basis with the big, credible magazines, for example, who come out with the generational talents and everything. And, reading this morning about Karamoko Dembele and the fact that his move to France hasn't worked out for him. He might end up getting loaned out or punted. And, I hate seeing that with footballers, but there are so many of them. There really are so many of them, James, that I don't know, that don't believe the hype. That's the big title for me. Don't believe the hype. There's been so many players that's come through at Celtic who think that they're up here and they should be getting a game and they're demanding game time, and it doesn't work out. They go elsewhere and they maybe get a bit of a reality check, And it's happened in football for years and years. And Dembele, I wish him all the best. Still got time on his side, but you just hope that he is able to come through that as well. With regards to some of the other points that are coming through here as well, I want to talk about the Irish trip and also want to talk about Japan. So you go over to these places. We haven't fed any kind of need for Celtic's brand in Japan since Nakamura was at the club, right? And Liam Carrigan and I spoke about this because, we obviously didn't buy Nakamura from a Japanese club, but his fan base and the fact that he was an international footballing hero and a god and everything else, We had him here at Celtic, and it was at that point that, you know, we start translating the website into Japanese and all that kind of stuff. But when he leaves the club, we do nothing to continue to, you know, for me, engage with that fan base who might have only been interested in Celtic because of Nakamura. And we didn't do it for a long, long time. And then we start buying Japanese players again. So we go over, and it's you know, understandable why we did it. We go over to Japan. But for me, it's not just about going over and playing a couple of games, because the attendances were not great. And you need to obviously build on that. And I think the same can be said about our trip to the Aviva. So was there 28,000 at the game, I think, 28,000, which is a decent, listen, it's a decent turnout for a pre-season friendly that was originally going to be played in South Korea. So it wasn't announced 6 months ago. I understand that the pricing of it was pretty high. Times are hard financially. I get all of that. But as a club, Celtic can and should do it better. I'm going to use the women's game at the weekend as an example, James. We're a patron. Last season we were anyway a patron of the women's team. We have heard nothing in relation to, you know, resubscribing to that this season. No one's even contacted us. No one sent us the details as they normally do for the women's fixtures. And yet they want us just to support the game. And I think there's a lot of things, a lot of simple, basic things that aren't being done right. So when you look at that game over in Dublin, you don't just leave it at that. You think to yourself, why was there only 28? How can we make it 35? How can we build it to 40? How can we sell the stadium out? And there's ways to do that. You've got to take Celtic to them rather than just open the doors and expect it. I remember going over to St. Pauli, right? And falling in love with the team and the fan base and everything else, and got really, really friendly with a couple of the fans over there. And they were really interested in the Celtic thing. They wanted to come over and experience Celtic Park. And you're speaking to them, James, right? And this is from the outside looking in. They want to see it on a midweek game under the lights, right? They want to see the huddle. They want to see Celtic fans singing. They want the full experience, what they think the Celtic Park experience is. So when we're going to all these places, we need to ensure that we give these places that experience. I don't think we've done that, because that involves engaging with the fan base and fan groups and making sure that we can do that and represent what the Celtic experience is. I think we can do it a lot better.
Yeah, I think that's not just Celtic, though. I think if Liverpool go on a tour of Thailand or wherever, they're not going to get the top-end atmosphere that I might be expecting. Even the tourism atmosphere has sort of brought itself to Anfield in itself when you see the crowd that's just filled with people with phones nowadays. But we all like to slag off the Premier League. No one really likes to give it the credit where it sometimes has earned it. One of the places the Premier League has earned it is that for years it's put in the work to build up the brand of the Premier League by they've been doing tours of Asia for like the last decade. The last 10, 15 years have been doing these games over in America. It's all about building up the brand. It didn't just happen with the press of a button or the click of a finger. They've been putting in the work to build up the brand for years. So now the kids that are in schools over in Japan or wherever, they're thinking, what football team they support? Well, Arsenal play Liverpool on Monday night. Let's go see that game. Whoever wins, I'll support that team. We need to give them the option. Why don't I support Celtic? It's going to be hard to try and sort of make Celtic as big a brand as what some of those Premier League teams are, just because of the sheer money they have. But we need to give these fans the option of, why don't I support Celtic? Brendan Rodgers mentioned the importance of building up Celtic, the brand, because it's easy if these fans are going to find it quite hard to get behind a team that's playing in the Scottish League. We need to sort of let them know the tradition of the club. It's to get behind the history of Celtic, to get behind the trophies that the club's won, the dedication of the fans. That's the sort of stuff that can sort of win new fans over, because they'll feel like they're a part of something. But when you're at Celtic Park, it feels like everybody's together, all singing from the same songbook. It's great, but as I mentioned at the start, it's hard to make them feel a part of it. But we need to do more to build up the brand. Brendan Rodgers has mentioned that, and hopefully this summer is just a start of it. Hopefully we can do something more next year. We've done Australia, we've done Japan. We might maybe do something in America next summer. Who knows? But if we can keep building up Celtic, the brand, I'm sure it can only mean good things for the club.
Yeah, you're right. And by the way, the example I gave there, St. Pauli, who for many, many years have played in the second tier of German football. So, it wasn't because they played in a sexy league as such that people were drawn towards them. It was something completely different. There was a cult element of that football team in the pretty modern day, actually, where their history became something a wee bit different, and it was pirates, politics, and punks. That was the whole thing. And that's what drew me towards them. Celtic have got that and an incredible history. And that's what can draw people towards Celtic, despite the fact that we played in this goldfish bowl of a league. And we'll obviously speak about the fact that there's a comment coming in here in terms of the wage cap that Celtic have got. And it's Robert Highland. Here we have it. Celtic will never attract next level players unless they raise the salary cap. And we'll never raise the salary cap unless we play in a different league. So there's things holding us back from doing that. We can't throw 40 grand at half a dozen players in terms of their weekly salary because we just couldn't be, we couldn't withstand the financial hit that would incur. So, yeah, I totally get what Robert's saying there. But, yeah, we can do it better. That's all I'm saying. And I've had my wee moan about the fact that we're obviously, in terms of communication, some things are really, really easy. Talking about which, we've got about 1,000 live on this Monday afternoon. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. We do not take a single viewer for granted. And that's what's great about doing the live gigs. You get to meet people who tune in. Joseph McGonigal, thank you very much for getting involved on the super chat as well, which is an option you can take, and you can get involved in that. You can become a member on YouTube. You can subscribe for free on YouTube. Whatever you decide is best for yourself, get involved. Give us a thumbs up, and if you want to make comments, just subscribe. You can do that absolutely. John Sweeney, if we got injuries at the back, I would prefer Scales to Kobayashi. Kobayashi is going to need a bit of work. I think Brendan Rodgers is going to have to work on his confidence. He's going to really have to work on the player. And it looked as though he was going to give him all the game time that he needed during the pre-season anyway, James. But then he got injured, But I'm not writing him off yet. I don't think we can write him off.
I think he's in quite a hard situation where players, you can have a few bad games and the fans might let you off with it. But Kobayashi's committed the unforgivable sin of having a bad game in a game against Rangers, which those games hold far more volume and stand out a lot more than if you're to have a 5 out of 10 performance at home to Hibs or whatever. So I feel like it's going to be harder for him to sort of repair his reputation with the fans just based on the fact that he had the poor game against Rangers. And I think he's going to need to sort of muscle up a bit as well. He's been getting bullied quite a bit when he's been playing. I remember, I think it was John Suter that basically absolutely flattened him to get to that. And I think I made the point that I don't think Stephen Welsh gets bullied like that if he's going for a goal. So it's going to take a lot for Kobayashi to sort of, if he's going to get a starting place at Celtic, which it seems a bit far-fetched at the moment, but his place in the pecking order, it will be up for a question. Where do you think it lies, sort of, in the Celtic standing at centre-back?
For me, on a personal level, I would say that he's behind Welsh. I agree with that. I really do. And in front of Welsh, I would have the obvious two plus our new signing, Nurowski. What am I even basing that on? I'm basing it on the fact that he's been bought within a certain framework. The transfer fee, you don't shell out between £4 and £5 million at Celtic unless you're expecting that player to be a first-team player. So I think he's as low as fifth in the pecking order.
Yeah, the thing is with Kobayashi, he was definitely an Ange signing. We wouldn't have brought Kobayashi in if Ange wasn't at the club, I don't think. And the fact that Ange was losing trust with him towards the end of last season to the point where he would play a defensive midfielder at centre-back rather than start Yuki Kobayashi, I think that's said a lot about him at Celtic. He's going to need a big summer if he's going to sort of get a place in the team. That's if it's not gone already.
You're right about the situation at the end of last season where Kobayashi was dropped. He was dropped for the Scottish Cup final. And you looked at that lineup. Welsh made it onto the bench. Kobayashi was unceremoniously dropped from proceedings. What does that do to a player's confidence when it's that manager that's brought you over? Ange was thinking, you know, at that stage, I'm guessing he already knew what his future plans were. Well, we know that he definitely knew where he was going. So he wasn't really thinking about the long-term impacts of dropping a player. He just wanted to get the result. So I get it. But yeah, Brendan Rodgers is going to have to do some work on building him back up. That's something that he's good at, though. Ryan H, we're talking about people coming through. Ben Doak getting minutes for Liverpool in pre-season. Still think we made a mistake selling him. Yeah, I think that there's a situation with Ben Doak that was an unfortunate one for us as a football club, in that the minute a team like Liverpool comes along, is going to be so tough. And I think the last throw of the dice was get him into the first team, and we gave him a few games in the first team. But the minute Liverpool wanted Ben Doak, we were up against it, weren't we?
Yeah, I think Ben Doak, he was about 16 when Liverpool registered their interest as well. So it's not as if there's a lot Celtic could have done. It's not as if you were giving him a lack of game time, so he jumped ship. He just turned 16. He'd only just became eligible to play in the first team. We'd give him, I think it was 2 or 3 games. He made an impact. I think it was it Ross County or Dundee United we had? I think he made
yeah, Dundee United he played against, yeah.
And they got an opportunity in a derby game as well, which, as much as Celtic were 3-0 up and absolutely coasting it, and he was getting brought on with 3 minutes to go, it's still a big moment for him. I think he grew up a Celtic fan, so it's a massive moment for his family as well. And he's had first team minutes at Liverpool. I think last season he had more sort of minutes for Liverpool than he did in his spell at Celtic, and he's been impressing in competitions like the English League Cup down there. The opening rounds of that competition is basically a chance for the top 6 Premier League teams to basically give the B teams a chance. You see guys like Ben Doak play from the start and impress. He scored his first senior goal last night in one of Liverpool's friendlies. But I don't think there's much Celtic could have done to keep Ben Doak at the club. So I think if you're going to enjoy watching Ben Doak play, it'll probably need to be for the Scotland national team. If we could perhaps get on a loan deal back sometime in about a year or 2 from now, that would be great. But I don't think you can sort of hold Celtic to that too much for losing Ben Doak. I don't think there's much we could have done.
No, you're right. And, you know, I think that the way that Klopp speaks about him as well, James, he's full of admiration for the kid. Anyone I've spoken to who's seen him playing as a kid, he still is a kid, but when he was even younger, they spoke about comparisons, and people don't like doing this, but comparisons with a young Wayne Rooney. Remember Wayne Rooney at that age, who, when he started training with the Everton first team at 15, he was just bossing it, which is bizarre when you look at the players he was playing alongside. So there was comparisons there. Yeah, I wish him all the best. I don't think we could have done a great deal with Ben Doak, but let's hope that he continues to develop. We've got CJ. It's Dublin as well. That trip could cost upwards of £500 a head. A lot of money to drop with 17 days' notice. Yes, I think that the 28,000 attendance was very impressive. I know that there are other games getting played over in Ireland that are demanding and commanding rather more people at them. However, we need to work on it. We need to build it up. Now, Kwon and Yang played at the weekend, James. They might have come on after you stopped watching the game. I'm not sure.
I missed them.
You missed their appearance. I was really impressed with them, right? Now, as I've said before, I don't expect them to be like Nurowski and really fighting for a first team. Well, they'll be fighting for a first team jersey, but they won't be expecting to play, I don't think. And I hope that they get more minutes tomorrow night in the James Forrest testimonial. But what I took from their performance was that it wasn't really under the radar. They got involved straight off the bat. They seemed, to be quite happy about being physical, which I thought was brilliant, right? So they were getting stuck right in, penalised as well a couple of times during their cameo appearances. But from what I've seen, and it is hard to make a judgment when it's only a few minutes, I thought both players looked very, very good. I'm looking forward to seeing more of them tomorrow night. Brendan Rodgers has spoken about using the opportunity of that testimonial to get as much minutes into the legs as possible, into as many players as possible as well. It could be a situation where there's wholesale changes, here and there during the game. But I'm going to link in what's happening tomorrow night to what happened on Friday night, because I was talking to Roy Aitken, as you know, and Roy Aitken enjoyed a testimonial at Celtic at a time where it was normal, I would say, for a player to spend a decade or 12 years, or in Roy's case, 15 years at a football club. That's not normal anymore. James is an anomaly in modern football, James. And I think that, it's something that needs to be celebrated. I heard yesterday the rumour that over 50,000 tickets had sold for the game. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that as a celebration to someone who is a one-club man and who has contributed positively in every season of the previous 14 seasons.
Yeah, it's always great to commemorate these guys because we're winning so many trophies in the last sort of 10, 15 years, and it's easy to take things for granted, which means it's easy to take players for granted as well. And I remember, I think the last testimonial we might have had at Celtic Park was Scott Brown's testimonial, and you think how big a sort of celebration that was. You had the likes of Henrik Larsson warming up on the touchline with Moussa Dembele and Odsonne Edouard. I remember that was a bit of a worlds colliding sort of moment there. And I hope we can get a similar celebration for James Forrest, my entire Celtic supporting life, although it might be limited, as the comments like to let me know time and time again. James Forrest has been a big part of that. A lot of trophies. James Forrest has been the main man. One of my favourite Celtic goals, my favourite game as a Celtic fan, beating Rangers 5-0 to win the league. James Forrest scores the best goal of that match by absolutely rinsing two Rangers players and firing the ball into the back of the net. He's a Celtic legend. There's no other real way to put it. And we'll hopefully have something like this in a few more years' time to celebrate Callum McGregor and what he's done to the club. As you mentioned, players like this are hard to come by. So when they do appear, and they do give the fans a pleasure of their services for over a decade, you've got to enjoy it.
No, you're right. And it's within that era where how often do we talk about a lack of loyalty? I mean, we were all gutted when Ange Postecoglou left the building. We were gutted when Brendan Rodgers left the building. A few managerial appointments before him. So when someone does stay and shows that loyalty, I think we need to celebrate it. With regards to what is a subscriber and a member and a sticker and a super sticker, these are all options on YouTube that you can take. And, I'm going to say to you with regards to anything financial when it comes to Acsom, what we would do with anything that comes into Acsom is we hope to build the channel first and foremost, create more content, more quality content in relation to obviously going through to Parkhead. That's the first additional channel content that we're adding on there, where we employ a videographer to record us and edit us and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to improve the content that we provide. And it will allow us also to set up live events whereby we hope to be able to raise as much as we can for charity as well. And without the platform, you don't have the opportunity to make as much for the charities, James. So we were looking at the total amount that we were able to raise so far. And it's an incredible amount. We're heading towards 95 grand, as a platform, having raised for good causes. And by the end of this year, the chances are that will go up to 100 grand. So it does feed into that, although it's not a donation maybe to the charity initially. It gives us a platform that allows us to then go to a wider audience. And Kieran W is the latest person to get involved in that. Great avatar as well, Kieran. And what also happens, obviously, if you get into a super chat is, you are highlighted instantly, and it allows us to bring it up as well. That does not stop us from bringing up people like Daniel F, who has been really surprised with how comfortable Big Scales has been. He's certainly the best of our backup defenders, and he's a left-footed defender. I'd keep him around this season. I think there are decisions to be made on both the players that were mentioned who are in that kind of same position, I feel. I think that the front six is far more established than the defence, and there's a lot of questions to be asked around various positions in there. Another passing over the weekend as well was Benny Rooney, James. Now, Benny Rooney was someone who played for Celtic. He signed for Celtic, and he later moved on to St Johnstone and Morton. He managed Morton, and he created and developed a really entertaining side at what is a provincial club at Greenock Morton, and he's an absolute legend at that club. Benny's dad was Bob Rooney. Bob Rooney was officially the physiotherapist for the Lisbon Lions, but Benny, laughed when we spoke about it actually many years ago. He says that he didn't have a physiotherapy qualification ever in his life. He had a heat lamp, but that was the kind of extent of his physiotherapy. But Bob Rooney was part of the trusted backroom team that Jock Stein had for a number of years at Celtic Park, alongside people like Sean Fallon and Neely Mockin, even Jimmy Steele, the masseur, and Willie Fernie for a spell looking after the second team, John Higgins, who used to scout and sign up the young players. He had a real bond with the backroom team, and Bob Rooney was part of that. Benny Rooney was his son. And, when you hear that these people pass on, it reminds you of times where they have assisted you in the past as much as anything, James. And Benny Rooney did assist me in the writing of my first book. So thoughts and prayers with his friends and family. Also, always sad to lose a member of the Celtic family. One last thing, just before we go, Ben McPherson has made a few appearances in the pre-season, and it brings to mind the fact that, he had a decent half hour, I felt, against Wolves. I thought he really acquitted himself well. And I've been pretty impressed with Vata and Lawwell as well. What do we do with them this season? What do we do with these guys to make sure that they develop, James?
I'm not too sure. We've mentioned how bloated the squad is already. Not too many of these players are going to get game time. You think, if anybody, maybe Rocco Vata, if any of them are going to get some game time. But I think the loan market has, as much as some players do fail when they go out on loan, they get caught up. It turns into a cycle almost. So I have seen players that have got out on loan and have succeeded, like Christopher Aya, Cal McGregor in sort of the last decade or so. So maybe a loan move could be the way to do it, whether that be in the Scottish lower leagues or going to the lower leagues in England. Who knows? But we need to get them some game time. That's sort of the best way to put it. And you're not going to get if you're playing in the lower league, the level of quality of the football, it's not high enough for them to develop into a Celtic quality player. I follow Bordereg Rose every weekend watching League 2 football, and I know that you're not going to develop playing at that level. If the lower league's the level below it, then I think we need to find somewhere else to try and house some of our talents. We've seen some of them going to the Austrian league, the team that we've partnered up with, Admira Vaca, I think that's the name of the team, Oliwayemi, and someone else joined them. Was it Matthew Anderson that joined them over there? And
there's another two that are heading over as well, one of whom is Joey Dawson.
Joey Dawson heading over. But whenever I've seen Joey Dawson, I've always been impressed with him, whether it be if I've got along to a B team game in person, or even when he made that appearance on Boxing Day against St John's. I didn't think it was that bad when he came on. He probably should have had a goal. But I think a loan spell was probably the best thing to do to develop some of our players.
No, I think so as well. And when you look at what is the alternative, it's B team football, it's fifth tier football in the Scottish league. So I think that it's for me, it's the best way to develop them. And also, you need to have someone who looks after the loan players as well. That's something that's very, very important. We have, of course, been drawn against Kilmarnock away in the quarterfinal of the League Cup, James. It's a trophy that we want to defend. I think there's a real, for me, there's a real importance on getting that first trophy. I think you've seen the impact of that in Angie's first season. You've seen it in Wim Janssen's season as well. And I'm looking forward to that game. And I hope that we have enough in the tank and enough new signings by then as well to get through that particular game. I'm pretty sure we will. No complacency, however. If you like what we do, give us a thumbs up on the YouTube channel. Get involved with the chat just by subscribing to the channel as well. And if you want to come along to one of these gigs that we've been doing all year, and they're great fun, absolutely love it. If you can imagine sharing the stage with an ex-Celt like Charlie Mulgrew or Aidan McGeady, you know how buzzing I am every time we do these gigs. The next one is at the pub that belongs to Jackie McNamara and Simon Donnelly. So they'll be kicking about that night as well. Not many tickets left for this one. It's been very popular. But if you want to come along and join us and have a wee chat and get involved in all things Celtic that night, the ticket link is underneath the video as well. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved. 1,000 strong on the bulletin today, which is tremendous on a Monday afternoon. I really appreciate it. And thank you to James Mackenzie for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.